Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Huang, and I am the Director of B2B Brand Marketing at Gannett USA Today Network. Welcome to the State of Black Health What Now Summit, created by BlackDoctor.org in collaboration with USA Today Network. We are honored to host this very special event at USA Today's headquarters, bringing together the brightest minds in health, businesses, and advocacy to advance the conversations in health equity. At USA Today, we reach 1 in 2 US adults every day and reach over 147 million US adults monthly unique visitors in over 200 plus local communities. But our impact is more than just numbers. It's about trust, fact, and action. Through strategic partnerships with brands like Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Novartis, US Department of Health, we bring critical health messages through storytelling to communities, through custom content, sponsorship, and so on. Today's summit is more than just a conversation. It's a catalyst for action. So let's get started and make impacts today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm Reggie Ware, CEO of BlackDoctor.org. We affectionately call ourselves BDO. I'll do some quick housekeeping. So it's BlackDoctor.org. There's no S on the end of that. And that's by design because So I started the company 20 years ago, and I was getting dressed this morning, and I said, wait a minute, 20 years? I mean, it's been amazing, right? It's been an amazing ride, and we're a mission-driven company, right? The goal is to get every Black family as healthy as possible. And for 20 years, we've been steadfast, focused on that particular goal. And even with all of the changes that are happening here, we always have to look at, what's really real. And so as an entrepreneur, whenever something happens, for some reason, what jumps out to me is, okay, well, what's really happening? And so with all the changes and with the new administration, what I'm seeing is an opportunity, right? Because with change, there's always an opportunity in there. And so what I'm seeing from our audience is that, Black community, when the administration says we're going to give you something, right? We never really get it. We're going to give, but we never really get it. But we sit back and wait and wait and wait, and we never get it. So when the guy comes and says, I'm taking away everything you got, also now we're energized. And that's an opportunity because we've got to keep things in motion. And so our mission, as I said earlier, is to get every Black family healthy as possible. Man, we got to do stuff, right? And so this is the opportunity to really focus on all the things we need to do. There's a health and wellness focus, right? Our core mission, our core strategy every day is this whole concept of equitable access, right? So while diversity in those words may be a bad word, hey, companies still have to get their pipeline. They have to have a robust pipeline, right? They got to bring drugs to market as quickly as possible. They got to grow their businesses, and we can help with that. We've been helping with that. That's why we've been around for 20 years. But I think more importantly, with the new landscape, I'm excited to listen and learn because, I love to sit back and listen. I love to come somewhere, right, and leave smarter than I was when I came here. And with this talent that we have here today, my goodness, first of all, thank you all for coming. And also want to thank our sponsors, Takeda, Eisai, UCB, GCI Health, and our gracious hosts from USA Today. I mean, this is just amazing. And, the last thing I'll say, nobody's doing like this, but I know I gotta stop. But the last thing I'll say is that, when diversity was hot and everybody was talking about it, it's it's no big deal when everybody's saying, okay, I'm gonna sponsor this, I'm gonna sponsor that. But now all of a sudden when everything's taken away, you really see who the true champions are, right? The people that are here today that's talking about it and so forth. And so I love this opportunity to talk about what we're going to do in the midst of everything that's happening, so that because the bottom line is togetherness, right? Together, there's this word that we've got this program at BDO, it's called Ubuntu. And it's an African word meaning togetherness with dignity, right? And so as we come together today, and it's not black versus white, it's right versus wrong, it's like-minded individuals that want to make the world a better place, right? As we come together and share ideas and exchange strategies, we're going to be all right. We're good? Okay. She said, put the mic closer. I wish you had told me that 5 minutes ago. Okay. But in any event, enjoy. This is going to be a great morning, day, and I'm glad you've all come. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Georges Benjamin. I'm the executive director at the American Public Health Association in Washington, D.C. And they've asked me to just kind of open up with a few remarks about some things that are kind of going on in the world and where I think we need to go. So I'm going to sit here so I can be comfortable and begin causing the trouble that I usually do whenever I'm in the room. Let me just say, I'm going to talk about three things today. Number one, I'm going to talk about kind of the political operating environment that we're in, kind of set that as some benchmarking. Number two, tell us a little bit about what I think the science tells us about equity and what we can do about it. And number three, kind of what we can do about, in many ways, the political environment that I think we're in today. Now, obviously, we one of my favorite comedians is Moms Mabley. And, most of what Mom said, you could not say in polite company. But this is something that she did say that you can say. And she said, if you always do what you always did, then you always get what you always got. And I want you to think about that, because that really tells us that in many ways, we're going to have to pivot in this new operating environment we're in. We're going to have to find new ways to do things that achieve our goals. And as we move forward in trying to ensure that the health of all people get optimized in our country, one of the things I want you to do is just stay focused on the fact that change is not bad. Change can be, in fact, very instructive. Now, we know that, we saw the election. We know the political environment that we're in. The Republicans have the House, Senate, and the White House, and that's not necessarily bad. That's just the reality of what it is. And they certainly have an ideology and values that they have been promoting for many years. And many of that we saw in the Project 2025 document, which many of us don't agree with most of the stuff in there. There's a few nuggets in there, but very few, I might add, from my perspective. But let me just say that one of the things that we've noticed in any political environment, particularly when you think you have a mandate, is that you overreach. All political parties do that. And some of the things you should understand what's happening right now is there's an enormous overreach occurring. And you know that because you're getting squawking from both sides of the political aisle. And that's how you know there's an overreach occurring. Now, where that goes and how long that lasts remains to be seen. But I just remind you that the president is functionally in his second term. Now, he may not think that, but that's true. And what that means from a practical perspective is that at some point, the fundamentals of politics in terms of at what point it becomes a lame duck moves in. And that just happens to all presidents, right? It happens to every president in their second term. And in this case, we know that there's going to certainly be a midterm election in 2 years. And history has shown that there's going to be some changes in Congress. They have very tight margins right now. They could flip, they could get tighter, they could get wider too. Hopefully that won't happen because I think leverage is very important for members of Congress, particularly at this point in time. Also, I think many of the things that the fact that we have 3 branches of government and we have a strong media still in this country, and we have very, very strong civil society in our country, which I think makes us much different from other countries that have been challenged like we're being challenged today. But let's pivot to health. So Secretary Kennedy is now in place. And some of you know during when he was running for office, and then later when he was working with President Trump, he articulated some priorities, and that's not unusual. You know, I've been a health secretary in a state in big city, DC and Maryland, and it's not uncommon for the political leaders to have their priorities, and for incoming cabinet officials to have their priorities. The problem is, of course, is that when you take over an agency, there is a list of things already on your docket that you have to take care of. And the health list is extraordinarily long. You know, 3 years loss of life expectancy, the fact that we're almost at $5 trillion of total health expenditures, half of that the federal government. I know they would like to take some of that to give a tax cut, but I don't think that's going to happen. We'll see what happens with that. The fact that we have outbreaks all over the country. We have the largest tuberculosis outbreak in our country. We have a rapidly growing measles outbreak, vaccine preventable disease in Texas, which is now spread to New Mexico. We have a health commissioner in Louisiana who has told his department that they can't do mass vaccinations and they cannot educate the public. Last time I checked, Louisiana was right next to Texas. You know, it'll be interesting to see how long that outbreak doesn't spread. And of course, as you can imagine, the outbreak in measles started in a low vaccinated population. And we have, you know, a Secretary of Health who has, at the very least, to be generous, is a vaccine denier. I didn't use vaccine skeptic. His history is that he's a vaccine denier. And there are several other people that have been nominated for senior roles at Health and Human Services whose vaccine skepticism is well known. So we're going to have to deal with that. And we've got H5N1, which is the bird flu, which is rapidly decimating our livestock in this country, spreading very rapidly. And while, you know, I'm very much concerned about bird flu in people, so no one should think that I'm not concerned about bird flu in people. I realize that the thing that's going to get a lot more interest probably right now is bird flu in cattle. I remember when we had West Nile virus, very much concerned about the impact of West Nile virus on people. It started here in New York, by the way, for those of you who may remember many years ago. I was the Secretary of Health in Maryland at the time and couldn't get a lot of people concerned about it. But the minute they hit the racing industry, people got a lot of interest in West Nile virus because they were concerned about the impact on the horses and the racing industry. It became automatically an economic issue. It wasn't that they weren't concerned about people. It was just that the economics became real when the horses were at risk. And now, of course, we're seeing that now with the price of eggs and the fact that we're having to cull chickens. And we now have an experimental vaccine for H5N1. There's a process going on for the mRNA vaccine, and there's some vaccines that we already have in stock. So we'll see what happens. But, you know, you can imagine a perfect storm now. We have vaccine skeptics in many places in government and a vaccine preventable disease. And the question is, at some point, the administration is going to have to ask itself, are they going to use a vaccine? So we'll be part of that debate. We've got HIV/AIDS is not going away, opioid epidemic. We've got diminished public health system, which of course they're going on and diminishing even more every day. So we've got some real challenges in health in our country that need to be addressed. That's on the Secretary's plate before we have the debate about fluoride in the water, before we have the debate about whether or not pharma is too engaged in the creation of pharmaceuticals. It's before we have the debate about processed foods. I remind you that if you think about the last 48 hours, how many processed foods that you ate, you know, by the way, processed foods are all the TV dinners that you ate, or the fast food that you ate, the ice cream that you ate. So it's, there's these evil foods over there that we're all consuming because we've dramatically changed our lifestyles each and every day. And big food is a big industry. Every time those of us on the more liberal side have tried to address high quality foods and nutrition, we've gotten a lot of pushback. Some of you may remember when First Lady Michelle Obama advocated in her Let's Move campaign and for healthy nutrition in the schools. There were some members of Congress who called that the nanny state. And now the Secretary of Health is being applauded because he wants to, have a nanny state. I'm not against high quality food in schools. In fact, I think that'd be absolutely wonderful. But I just want to remind you that to do high quality food in our schools, it's going to cost more money. That was probably the problem. You have to cost more money. And there is this conflict between what we do with the farmers and the subsidies we do with the farmers and what we actually serve our kids on the table. So there are some policy dilemmas and conflicts that have to get worked out. I hope they can work that out. And I'll come back to that kind of stuff in a minute. I say that to say that big agenda on the table long before the president priorities or the secretary's priorities actually can get moving. And I remember when I was a health secretary, I had all the things that were happening in the health department in Maryland. And then I had the one or two things I thought I would love to accomplish while I was there, realizing it's, Secretary of Health there is really a temp job, be there for a few years. And I knew the course had the governor's priorities that I had to, absolutely prioritize in my day. So we'll see how that works out. But those conflicts are going to have to work themselves through. One of the things I had the honor to do was co-chair a committee for the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And we came out a report called Unequal Treatment Revisited. And what we did was we looked at the 20-year history between the time the Academy looked at the last unequal treatment report. The first unequal treatment report basically raised to our visibility the importance of the social determinants of health and the fact that clinicians come to the table with biases. We all have biases each and every day in what we do. And, we had, it was basically an earthquake because every clinician in the country said, I'm not a racist, I'm not biased. The answer is we all carry these biases to the table. It doesn't mean you're a racist, but we all come to the table with preconceived notions based on our life experiences and how we manage things, which is why diversity is so important, because you want to bring people's various life experiences to the table because you get a better mix, you get better opinions. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. It's part of that process. And so we looked at it 20 years later, and we found out a couple of things. Number one, the fact that our health system is designed to give us inequities. It's fundamentally designed to give us inequities. No question about that. We have to rethink about that system. Let me just speak about one. Obviously, we have a system that doesn't have everyone in and no one out. We're the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have universal coverage. Not talking about single payer. That's a separate discussion. But I'm talking about a system with everyone in. Because there are many public systems in other nations and public-private systems that get universality. So those are some of the things we want to think about as we're going forward, that we've got to rethink that system. And the fact is, we pay providers so differently. Medicaid pays differently from Medicare. Medicare pays differently from the private sector. And those of you who are practicing clinicians know that drives who gets in the system and who doesn't get in the system each and every day. Clinicians make business decisions, even though they want to take care of patients because of what they can afford to do in terms of the quotas of patients they can bring in their practices. That happens all the time. So we need to think about those things. And then we need to use the science. The other thing we discovered was that the science really hasn't gotten that much better over the years. So I think that we've got to think about what we do with all that stuff. And then obviously we're in a time of political turmoil. And so I want to just say some things that I think we can do politically as we go forward. Number one, we need to triage what we're doing. Don't chase all the shiny things. That basically means we need to make sure that everyone's following the law. We need to force transparency. We need to inform the public of the impact of these actions. That's going to be very important, that the public understand, help them connect the dots to who's responsible for doing what. Don't let them redefine terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can fool them by making it inclusion, equity, and diversity, so they won't know what we're talking about. But don't let them redefine that. It does not mean what they said it means. It does not mean exclusivity. It does not mean discrimination. It means diversity, everybody in the room, everybody getting to participate. Equity, everybody gets what they need. And inclusion means everybody at the table, no matter where you're from. And maintain our core values as we go forward, for sure. And really have no fear, because one of the most important things that we know is that people only have the power that you give them. And if you don't give them the power, they can't intimidate you. They can't move you. One of the interesting things about our nation is it is of the people, by the people, for the people. And we need to continue with that as our core principle. I want to thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. And I think this is a great opportunity. And I want to thank the leaders at BlackDoctor.org.
All right, let's hear it once more for Dr. Georges Benjamin. As we have the next panel coming up, I just want to reiterate a couple of things that came out of, that I took a point of in his speech. So as the next panel comes on up, and I think there are some things that we can agree on, that he mentioned that there are some real challenges in health right now. He mentioned H1N1, tuberculosis, HIV, AIDS. There's just turmoil throughout. But he also mentioned, and what was mentioned earlier, was that there's a tremendous opportunity. And the title of today is State of Black Health, What Now? We're not asking the question, what now? These great minds in the room are determining what now? And that's an exciting time, an exciting opportunity to determine the future. What now? Right now. You all are doing it. And I'm so excited to be a part of it. And I'm sorry, I didn't even introduce myself earlier today. I was saying what's up to everybody, but you know, that's how we do in church. We say, what's up? What's up? How you doing? So let's try it again for the folks that also just came in. What's up? How you doing? Guten Tag. Oh, I was just checking with you, just checking. My name is Derek Lane. I'm Chief Marketing Officer here at BDO, and we're excited to introduce the next panel. So please give them a warm welcome.
Good morning. I am Charisse Jones, and I am a money and consumer news editor with USA Today. And so I want to welcome you again to our offices and to this wonderful summit, where I think we're going to learn a lot today. And I also want to let you know I'm an author, and I've written a book called Shifting: The Double Lives of Black Women in America. And it's about the double jeopardy that Black women deal with in terms of racism and sexism, and the toll that takes on our health, mentally and physically. I wrote another book called The Invisible Ache with the actor Courtney Vance, and it's about Black men and their mental health. So in short, the health of our community means a lot to me. So I'm really honored to be here with these illustrious voices. We're going to dive in, and they will introduce themselves when they answer their first question and answer. So first of all, good morning, Rashad.
Good morning.
I'd love for you to introduce yourself and also lay the foundation for the conversation on health equity being a business imperative, right? And talk about how the pharmaceutical industry, and especially Gilead, manages to stick to that focus, stick to that mission during such difficult times that we're in right now.
Thank you so much. First to BDO and to USA Today. Thank you for having us, and thank you, Charisse, for your moderation. My name is Rashad Burgess. I'm Vice President of U.S. Advocacy and Health Equity at Gilead Sciences. Essentially, I'm responsible for the organization that brings the voices of our patients, the voices of our communities into the business to ensure that it's incorporated into our business strategy. And we center our business strategy around health equity, really ensuring that we are closing the gaps in everyone that needs or wants our therapies have access. And so I think that's key to actually how we see and how I view the framing of health equity, and that it's a business imperative. When I think about the work that we do every day, whether it's in HIV, whether it's in oncology, whether it's in inflammation, those therapeutic areas, those diseases impact disproportionately Black and brown communities. And so for us, we are always having to think about, if we're going to grow our market, if we're going to grow our market share, if we're going to leverage our innovation, how do we ensure that we do it and do it in ways that everyone is able to benefit and be impacted by the therapies that we're bringing forth to the market? And then finally, it's about our leadership. It is about building trust and doing the right thing for the communities and doing the right thing by our business. And that's really core to our framing around health equity.
Thank you. Good morning, Brandon.
Good morning.
Please introduce yourself and tell us if there are a few things we should pay attention to in this changing climate. What would those be?
Sure. So nice to meet everyone. Thank you to BDO for the invitation. Brandon Batiste here. I'm a vice president for healthcare innovation with Morgan Health. Morgan Health is a business unit within JPMorganChase, and we focus on improving employer-sponsored healthcare. So about 160 million people throughout the country receive their healthcare through their employer. And our goal is to impact the quality, affordability, and equity of that care. And so my focus areas are everything from cardiometabolic disease, primary care, mental health, social drivers. And then I also help many of our portfolio companies grow and scale. So going back to Charisse's question about what some of those things are, the first thing is care delivery. So what we've seen over the last year, particularly, has been an explosion of different modalities of which members can actually access care. And so you can argue whether or not demographically are related to access, what that looks like in terms of equity, but the average American has more options, right? That's one. The second thing that's top of mind is the uninsured population. So, you might have seen in the press recently about the potential of changes to Medicaid. Don't know what that looks like quite yet, but the uninsured population is expected to grow substantially over the next several years, upwards of 30 million. The third part to that, which is probably the most important to the work that I do, is the 25% of Americans who actually have health insurance but are not engaged in care or do not have access to a primary care provider. And that is in tune to around 75 million people. And so in the event that you actually have access, you do have healthcare insurance, and you are engaged, then the fourth bucket is really about affordability. Can you actually afford that care? And so what we know from Trilliant Health and other organizations is that around 25% of people, actually 57% of people, Americans actually spend around 10% of their income monthly on healthcare. And around 89% of people actually have $500 of healthcare debt or more. And so affordability becomes a real question. So of the points that are top of mind for me are really the basics, right? How can we ensure access? How can we ensure that people are engaged in care, and to make sure that they could afford that care?
Thank you. Hi, Shobha. We know diversity in clinical trials has long been an issue, right? Can you give us some background as to why it's so important to have diversity in trials? And has it been a particular challenge to get the Black community to participate in those efforts?
Thank you for the question. Hi, everyone. I'm Shobha Dhadda. I'm Chief Clinical Science and Operations Officer at Eisai. What that means is I'm responsible for designing clinical trials, implementing the conduct of the trials and analysis and interpretation. And I'm really honored to be here today amongst such impressive advocates of health in Black communities. And Eisai is actually really happy to be participating in this summit today. So when I think about clinical trials and representation, it's not just about health equity. When you look at the data, you see that different investigational medicines impact differently depending on the age, race, or ethnicity. So when we are designing a clinical trial for a project, or a drug, it's really important for us to think about who will be the participants in this clinical trial, because we want to make sure that participants represent the population that this investigational medicine will be best suited for, that we'll be treating for. So, and we also know very well, as you mentioned, that there is disparity, that there is in this community of Black communities, the Alzheimer's disease does impact disproportionately. So we had all of these thoughts in our mind when we were starting to initiate our pivotal phase 3 study. And keeping that mindset, we realized the very first step that we had to take was to build trust and credibility with the community. That was our biggest hurdle. Thank you.
And how did you build that trust and credibility? I mean, the Black community has such a history with the medical establishment that has had some negativity going back to Tuskegee and some of those other efforts that were very negative. So how did you do that? How did you establish that connection?
That's a very good question, and there are many challenges. In addition to what you're saying, it's one of the key challenges is also the accessibility to clinical trials and knowledge about clinical trials. People wanting to participate in clinical trials, like even if you know and you understand about it, right? So before we initiated, the very first step we did was to select sites, investigators or doctors that already had diverse communities, that they were treating diverse populations. So that was our first step. And we wanted to look, and these sites or hospitals, generally they are in metropolitan cities where it's very difficult for all communities to access, right? So we also looked at the location of these sites, and we then connected, and we made sure that the sites were embedded in the communities that we wanted to reach out to. And we connected with Black churches and the local community leaders, the advocacy leaders there. We ran a lot of community screening programs, and we prepared education material that would help participants understand why it's important to participate in this clinical trial. So like we prepared education materials on brain health, on Alzheimer's disease. And then we had this really English layman language laid out clearly about the clinical trial that we are conducting. What is it about? What is the criteria? Who will be eligible to this? So there were like the really basic steps we had to take. And then we, along with this, we also implemented something that was very unique and new in the space, which is called decentralized clinical trials. Basically, creating an environment so that there's less burden on the patients to participate in the clinical trials, where we would introduce things like, this was an infusion drug. So that means a patient had to go to the clinic or the doctor's office at least twice a month and get the infusions, right? So we incorporated home infusion nurses. We instituted remote assessments, televisits. We could get the blood samples of the patients at home. So we tried to do everything we could do to make it easier for the participants to participate in the clinical trials. Thank you.
All right. So Brandon, the JPMorgan Healthcare Conference, usually sets the tone, right, for the upcoming year in terms of healthcare delivery trends and other actions. What do you see as priority areas right now, especially given all that we're seeing coming out of Washington and state capitals?
It's a good question. So last year at the healthcare conference, GLP-1s really dominated, the airwaves. And some of the themes that came out of this year's healthcare conference really centered around AI, artificial intelligence. There was lots of conversations around personalized medicine, genomics, proteomics. There was lots of conversation around digital health and the explosion about what that means. And so really good themes. I've heard conversations around liquid biopsies and robotics and how that is all changing the healthcare space. I will say that across all themes, the big piece that's been missing has been health equity in a lot of those conversations. On the digital health side, just to give a brief example, when I first started this work around cardiometabolic disease about 2.5 years ago, I was aware of 436 organizations that were providing some sort of point solution to members, employers, selling to health plans, et cetera. Last quarter, that number was over 800 and I stopped counting, right? So the market has really exploded, particularly when you add GLP-1s, obesity care to the mix. And so the other theme is around increased M&A activity for 2025, which we are seeing, acquisitions, consolidations of companies, et cetera, et cetera. There is an organization here in New York, Digital Health New York, that did an analysis, I think 2023, 2024, that really looks at, particularly when you look at the digital health space, the one area that has been untapped with respect to investment is health equity at around 46%. So when we talk about the business imperative, it is there, it does exist. We're just not having as many conversations about what that means when we look at the brass tacks. So those are some of the themes that we've seen across the board. But I think that the conversation needs to be more around how that care is delivered across these innovation themes and at what cost to the member.
Thank you. Rashad, Gilead is leading the way in HIV prevention, right, with innovations like investigational L4P. I couldn't pronounce the actual name, so I had to abbreviate it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that treatment has long-term potential to transform HIV prevention and expand access for those who need it most. How does that innovation match up with Gilead's broader business strategy? And what steps are you taking to ensure it reaches the communities that are most affected by HIV?
Charisse, thank you for the question. Let me just say there is palatable excitement about lenacapavir for PrEP. And let me tell you why. So the first thing, lenacapavir for PrEP is a capsid inhibitor that is dosed twice annually, that is an injectable that prevents the acquisition of HIV. And we just concluded in 2024 two pivotal trials, Purpose 1 and Purpose 2. We read out Purpose 1 at the International AIDS Society Conference and Purpose 2 in December. Purpose 1 read out, it was 100% effective at preventing HIV. Participants were Black women in South Africa and Uganda. Over 5,000 Black women participated in that trial. Purpose 2 was men, primarily men who have sex with men, gay men, non-gender binary, trans men, trans women, basically gender diverse, from 7 different countries. And it read out that those who received lenacapavir had 99.9% effective at reducing HIV acquisition for a total reduction of 96%. All right. Let me tell you why this really matters, especially when we talk about Black communities, is that currently we have about 440,000 persons who are on PrEP, all right? Of that number, only about 14% are Black. Yet, Black communities make up the majority of people who are being diagnosed with HIV infections. Half of all HIV infections are being diagnosed in the South, primarily in Black communities. So what this means is that our communities, who's being mostly impacted by HIV, aren't benefiting from the benefits of PrEP. So you may say, well, why is that? And how does lenacapavir address that? I'm glad you asked. Is that the reason is around adherence. So it's not just about access and people can get the drug. We've done an enormous amount of work to really ensure that PrEP is available, whether generic PrEP or whether branded. People can get it at the pharmacy, and most people pay nothing out of pocket. That's true today. The issue is around adherence and is around stigma. So what happens with PrEP is people oftentimes don't want to be associated with having to take a medication that prevents the acquisition of acquiring HIV. Why? Because there might be some shame about whatever particular behaviors are associated with it. There might be they're in relationships that they don't want individuals to know that they are actually taking PrEP. So this matters because lenacapavir for PrEP allows someone to go into the office, get an injectable, and walk out, and they're not having to worry about daily dosing because they come back 6 months later to receive a second dose, and they are able to have anonymity and privacy in doing that. I have to say, this is still investigational. We filed for approval for the FDA. We announced on yesterday that we actually we're going to get an early review. And so we should have an answer in June whether or not we get approval or not. This is a game changer. And last thing I'll say, if you don't believe me, because I work for Gilead Sciences, I get it. Science Magazine selected lenacapavir for PrEP for its 2024 breakthrough innovation of the year. So if you don't believe me working at Gilead, believe Science Magazine. This is a game changer. Thank you.
So if you get that approval, and hopefully you will, how do you spread the word? I mean, is this something that you go to TikTok with, or?
Oh, we're talking about TikTok. We absolutely are. So one is that globally, we actually announced our access strategy even before we filed for approval, because that's how important access is to us. And so globally, we're working with companies that make a generic formulation of it, who will do voluntary licensing, really ensure that 127 low and moderately income countries will have access to it. It's very important because we really do have a global commitment. Here in the US, we're going to be working with payers. We're working with partners to ensure that people are getting the word out and people know that it is available. It is going to be an enormous amount of work, but we're putting all of the arsenal that we have to really ensure that our communities are aware of its availability and its benefit.
Fantastic. Brandon, if you were writing a health equity playbook for 2025, what key areas would it contain?
Oh, don't we have enough playbooks? I think the first area is, keeping, each other healthy is paramount. When we look at the bench research across the board, a lot has changed post-COVID. You look at breast cancer, uterine cancer, kidney cancer, pancreatic cancer, there's an upward trend across the board. You look at chronic diseases is skyrocketing across the board post-COVID. Behavioral health is up. So we're also seeing late stage diagnosis with cancer continuously increasing, particularly over the last 5 years. We're also seeing increase in cancer diagnosis with young adults up to 45 years of age across the board, right? And so the reality is that we have a lot to contend with on an ongoing basis, with one, keeping each other healthy. And so that's an ongoing effort. The second, can't say BlackDoctor.org without talking about the actual workforce. And so we know what those challenges are. I've seen lots of studies and even some pilots and tests related to community health workers and, testing pharmacy techs and other, provider extenders. I feel like there's still tons of research to be, tested and piloted related to the efficacy of, those opportunities, but there's, opportunity there. And then I think that, so the workforce, keeping each other healthy, and also thinking about the data. As an employer, we often have only the snapshot from a data perspective of the tenure that the employee is actually with us, but partnering with providers, other organizations who really have that longitudinal view so that we could better manage our patient population is also very important. So I think we have, I've seen a lot of playbooks. You can Google, the White House even put out playbooks related to social drivers and other things. There's lots of frameworks that are out, whether you're talking about social drivers or, healthcare, workforce. I don't see them being tested though. I don't see these frameworks being implemented, piloted at scale. And so it'd be really good to see organizations put these frameworks into practice, and see how we can actually share some of those outcomes.
And this is a question for all three of you. Besides telling everyone to keep at it in this room, right, to keep going, which I'm sure everyone intends to do, what is one message you all would like to leave with the people gathered here in regard to how to keep pushing for more health equity and access? Shobha, you want to get us started?
Sure. From my perspective, I think 2 words: educate, participate. Because it's really important for to increase this awareness of what are clinical trials in the communities, and then participating in these clinical trials and encouraging everyone to participate. I think that's really, really important. We will continue to make all our efforts to reach out to a wide range of communities across the globe. However, if the communities don't step up, we need to partner together, basically.
Right.
2 things. One, I think it's really good for us to convene in these types of spaces, but there are tons of spaces where we're not represented. And so I would encourage all of us to be in spaces, think about what agriculture is doing. I think one thing that we really are learning throughout this process is that we're really all connected, the work that we're doing. And so I would encourage you to, spend time with aviation, spend time with agriculture, spend time with the pharmacists, go to their conferences, put yourself on the agenda, but also share your stories. I see many of you, some of you look familiar, but I also want to know more about what you're doing. A lot of us are not publishing, we're not writing, we're not talking about our stories. So I often don't know how to help. I often don't know what you're challenged by. I often don't know, have you made progress? Are there outcomes, right? So we should be really, really talking about our stories more. And I think we should be, in spaces with other sectors. The other thing is that we should be spending more time talking about the commercial drivers of care as opposed to the social drivers and the impact that civic society, government, corporate really have in impacting our health outcomes.
I think 3 things. I think one is that we really have to lean into how health equity impacts business. And those of you who work at corporations, I'm sitting here looking at so many of you, really reframing it, taking it it's not about a social imperative. It really is about a business imperative and really making the business case argument. We need to really do more of that. Secondly is around partnership. I do think that you get much further going with others. And so we need to do more of this and really stay connected. I know that there's a lot that's happening outside of this room that has a lot of our attention. But what's true is that Black communities need us. And when we're distracted and not focused, it impacts the communities that we are here to serve. And so we really owe it to ourselves to stay focused.
I think we want to take a couple questions from the audience. If you want to say something, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kendall Whitlock. I'm head of digital optimization at the Walgreens Clinical Trials Division. And my question is, as sponsors and those who are supporting and understanding healthcare innovation, where do resources come from for the continuity of community engagement? I know from a clinical trials perspective, if we think about the end-to-end of our budgets, we don't often think about the upstream investment in understanding maybe what the needs are of a community beyond the diagnosis and the eligibility for a trial. So if you could maybe give a little bit of a response to how do we provide that continuity for the education, for the awareness, so that there can be participation if the community hasn't heard of a clinical trial or only heard negative things about clinical trials.
So maybe I can start. So we actually, when we have this whole process for clinical development, which takes 10 years, 15 years, right? And most of them don't even reach the pivotal studies. So we start our development plans from the first in human as soon as we have that drug in our clinic, so to speak. And in that, like you have a clinical trial, you have a protocol, you have a statistical analysis plan, you have a clinical study report. Similarly, we have a diversity plan that we have started. And that plan starts from the first in human clinical trials, and we continue to add to it in terms of what are our goals and what are our objectives, how do we attain it, and what's the budget we need to allocate to each of these activities. So we start from the beginning and we take it to the end. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, when I referenced our purpose trials, we've had community advisory groups, we call them CAGs, that actually have been heavily involved in influencing the design and execution of the trial. And from that, we actually are going to continue to have these community advisory councils. And so we have one for the US, for example, in HIV. We're engaging the community, getting key insights, and bringing it back to the business. And, you know, I say, we ask where the money comes from. It's allocated through our regular budgeting process. I mean, those of us who are leaders in the company, we see the value in it, we position its value, and we ensure that it's funded and supported. We don't just stop once we get the data after the trial. We really build it into our overall execution, bringing the therapy to market and building and maintaining those strategic partnerships so we can close those gaps. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, good morning. We are all here today because USA Today and BlackDoctor.org brought us together. For each of your businesses, can you share why is a partnership with BlackDoctor.org so important?
I'll kick off and start. I mean, I think BlackDoctor.org is a very important and critical trusted voice in Black communities. And we're living in a time where there's so much misinformation and disinformation, and people need to know where they can go for information that they can trust. And I would position that the BDO is one of those places where our members of our community are able to go and know they're getting accurate, honest, unbiased information.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even irrespective of race or ethnicity, just navigating Alzheimer's disease, understanding how to get the diagnosis, how to get the treatment, which doctors will actually help you navigate through this maze is very difficult. Having community leaders like you here today would really help expedite this process, to help, even if it doesn't expedite, it's just to help the communities understand, be aware, and really not think about stigma, but think about solution, and help each other out to reach the solution that's needed. Most of the time that we have seen, it's really unfortunate for Alzheimer's disease that the diagnosis is too late. By the time you get diagnosed, it's too late to really provide any treatments. So early diagnosis is critical in this space. So thank you.
And I'll just put an asterisk on the trusted resource, point, because, I see tons and tons of companies, particularly as of late, that are thinking about health equity, doing health equity, that are not necessarily representative of the community. And so I think it's just really important to have organizations like BDO who really, are a trusted resource, who understand the cultural nuance that is often attached to providing care. And so I think I would love to see more of that, via connections to vendors, connections to organizations who are doing meaningful work in the healthcare delivery space.
You and then you.
Okay. I have a question for Brandon, being at JPMorgan. What you talked a little bit in your comments about partnerships and alliances to close care gaps and focus on health equity from a financing perspective, from a policy perspective. What are some examples of some alliances you would like to see more of?
Yeah, so within Morgan Health, we have 3 verticals. And so there's the ventures vertical, where we focus on healthcare investments, mostly Series B and above. Where I sit is the healthcare innovation team, where we are a thesis-driven group. And so we identify challenges, opportunities within the ESI space, and through tests and pilots and partnerships, we try to close those gaps. And then we have a third vertical, which is really our healthcare advocacy and policy team, health equity, and they do, tons of different partnerships and things like that. We do, through our benefits team, who really serves as our fiduciary, we sort of run everything through JPMC in that regard, who really manages the portfolio of work. It's often difficult, I would say, to implement a benefit to a member because you don't want to take a benefit away. So there's a real, long tail for integrating something into the benefit. But there's tons of opportunity to test, pilot, innovation, I would say, in certain demographics, if there is an opportunity. Think about, a market service area that might have, really low outcomes related to chronic disease. Maybe there's a point solution that could really help to solve that. And so we sort of test those things. But then as a thought leader, we do a lot of work with organizations and organizations that are thinking about ASI to be able to publish around various themes. So those opportunities always exist.
I'm Dr. June Joseph. I have a clinical research site here in Manhattan. And my question is really the tail end of after the study. So you asked about the beginning stages. But the challenge that I have as a PI is that, and I do mental health research, is that after the clinical trial is completed, a lot of times we then have to scramble to find clinics for the patients. So I just wonder about what is happening in drug development in terms of creating aftercare. A lot of times we try to negotiate aftercare in the budgets, but I just wondered about that because there aren't enough people with healthcare plans in place and providers in place, especially for mental health.
So that's a very difficult question you asked. So let me just speak about the Alzheimer's disease trials we were running, and it was quite a challenge to run the clinical trial in the first place because we had really huge screen failure rate. Then once we had the result, and there have been lots of failures in this space in the last 3-4 decades, right? And then fortunately for us, we did get this drug approved in US. So what we do in such a situation is when we have these clinical trials that are ongoing, we can keep them going even after the key pivotal time point of the readout of the study. We use those results to do all the regulatory submissions to get the drug approved. However, we keep the clinical trial going while all these decisions are being made. Globally, we keep it going. And then once we have the drug approved in a country, then we try to transition those patients into that commercial product. That's how we try to manage for the clinical trials. Thank you. And actually, that's true for all therapeutic areas, whether it's oncology. We just continue to keep the trials, keep the patients on those trials. We just minimize the assessments, but we keep the trials going so they have the benefit of close oversight and the treatment. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? One more.
Often for clinical trials, you read out, you see your 5-year survival, but we don't really have funding to track what's happened to those patients after those 5 years. So we're missing a lot of that, late term effects, the survivorship and the other financial toxicity. So is there a way to start capturing more of that data or getting funding to capture that?
So we actually, after our pivotal trials, and once we bring a therapy to market, we often continue with open label studies or we'll have even head-to-head trials. So there's definitely a body of work that goes beyond the pivotal trials that gets a therapy approved by the FDA. And that's something we have a long practice of doing, whether it's an oncology franchise or HIV franchise and beyond.
And in addition, we actually have, and this is true for all clinical trials across all the pharma companies, is that any adverse event, especially if it's a serious adverse event, it has to be reported to the FDA, and they collect that information and they keep track of that. So there are avenues, and there's publications on those as well. So there are avenues where long-term safety is also continued to be collected on these clinical trial participants, as well as the real-world experience.
I think we're at time, but I want to thank our wonderful panelists. Can we get a round of applause? And please enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you for being here. Thanks.